Hi everyone. Today we got on the show a legend in the space of lean and enterprise excellence, Mr. Frank Devine. Frank has a long history in excellence, been experimenting for years and years to truly look at how to create a culture of continuous improvement. He played a big part in Cardiff University and the Lean Enterprise Resource Centre and everything that was achieved there. And today we're going to look at his new book, which is going to be amazing. Now, for those that want to get more information out of this, Frank has kindly given us 3 articles that you can go to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast website to resources and download them. The first one is how organizations get employee engagement wrong. The second one, how to build an employee-owned work culture. And the third one, why do we expect so little from leadership development? Great articles to learn more. But boy, this episode has some great concepts that's going to stretch our thinking. Let's get to the show.
Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where we aim to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve and create enduring, high-performance, low-impact enterprises. Learn how to enhance morale, customer and purpose centricity, focus, and calmness. Learn how to create and sustain a culture of excellence at all levels of your organisation.
And I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. We are proudly brought to you in association with SA Partners, a world-leading business transformation consultancy. SA Partners are a truly purposeful company focused on helping organisations achieve sustainable improvement for themselves, others, and the planet. Welcome to episode 166 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. Welcome to episode 163 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Mr. Frank Devine on the show with us today. Frank is a culture change and engagement specialist and author of the recent book, Rapid Mass Engagement, Driving Continuous Improvement Through Employee Culture Creation. Frank has trained senior leaders and internal change champions in organizations such as Johnson & Johnson, Royce, Coca-Cola, Boston Scientific, and many more. It's going to be a pleasure to chat on this critical topic of any excellence journey. Let's get into the episode. Frank, thanks so much for joining us today, mate.
My pleasure, man.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Frank, I know you've got a massive background in cultural transformation and really helping organizations achieve excellence. And, you know, we were talking about a stat before the show where there's, you know, a lot of the people you've worked with have gone on to win Shingo prizes, a good percentage. Yeah. And you mentioned there's a lot of other factors, of course. But what led you to write this book, Rapid Mass Engagement, after this massive career of helping organizations transform to achieve excellence?
Well, what actually happened was when we set up the Cardiff Lean Enterprise Research Council under John Bacino, I was invited to speak on the topic of creating pull for lean. So the challenge then always is, you know, it doesn't matter how well trained people are and how much lean methodology they understand. If they don't have the burning desire to improve their workplace and improve themselves and their communities, etc. So that was my role within that master's program. And you'll know there's lots of eminent graduates of that program. So at that stage, John actually said to me, Frank, we need to get this into a book. And I said, yeah, okay. So when in 2022, I started writing it. Now, why? Now, one possibility is I'm just really slow. So I get the opportunity in 2000, I do it in 2022. But let's rule that one out, because in general, I'm not just very slow. The issue was sample size and credibility. So what I wanted to demonstrate in those 22 years was, had I just been lucky early on? So had my design just fortuitously produced very good results? Or was there something, if you like, scientific behind this? So essentially those 22 years were creating a bigger and bigger sample size across different sectors and just testing the model. You know, for example, in scale, the largest site where we've done this is Boston Scientific, 3,200. But before we did that, the senior team quite rightly said to me, Frank, can you guarantee that we can scale this to 3,200 employees? And I think they were expecting me to say yes. But I didn't say yes. I said, no. I said, I can't guarantee because it hasn't been tested yet. But what we can do is diagnostically predict what are the challenges to, for example, momentum, between the first workshop and the last workshop in such a large site, and then put in place appropriate adjustments. The way we would do with a disabled person, if we were doing a building, we'd make reasonable adjustments to the building. So what we'll do is we'll work together and we'll redesign to take account of the big size,
Yeah.
and so that's what was going on during those 22 years. I wanted to be able to not just do a story, but also to back it up with some data. And if I was saying that we needed a data conscious, lean approach, a very good leadership approach, as well as the engagement approach, we needed to be able to back that up somehow for rightly skeptical people who, suffer from what I call publication bias, where people only write about the stuff that works and don't bother publicizing where it doesn't work. I don't know if you've noticed, but I have a whole chapter on in the book on when it doesn't work, when it hasn't worked, because I think you can learn maybe sometimes more from those cases than from the ones that people enthuse about, if you like.
Oh, Frank, I think through my career, I've always learnt more from the challenges than you do from the successes in many regards. And Frank, I know that, it's I guess it's no coincidence that, Ireland has done so well with winning Shingo prizes and the greater Europe area, but it's amazing how many have been won in that Irish area. Comparing to Australia, I'm not even going to mention, right? But what is it there, Frank? Like, is it that in those Irish businesses that you got focused on culture quicker than what other people have, or you weren't so obsessed with the tools and techniques? What was it, do you think, that led you down this path? I think
there's a strong correlation with the Lean Enterprise Research Council in Cardiff, because a lot of the people in those companies came across me, for example, and other people on that program. And there wasn't anything, they didn't feel of equivalent status in Ireland at the time. So they were going to the UK in little groups, if you like, and that formed networks. And because of the clustering of medical devices, pharmaceutical, and companies like Twitter and Google and all that in Ireland, in a relatively small population, you get the same kind of clustering effects you get in northern Italy with the medium-sized clothes companies and fashion companies. So you have a major cluster effect, and then that focal point in Lerk in Cardiff. And don't forget, the way we designed Lerk, John's vision was to open up a lead masters to people who didn't necessarily have first degrees. So to kind of, you saw the theme in the book about giving opportunities to people who may not have had the opportunity or the particular aptitude to be academically brilliant, but were able to practically work on improving things at work, and then to give them the theory and the background and the exposure to other people. So we had an interesting mixture on that program. We had MBA graduates who now wanted to learn how to do it in practice. And we also had people who deliberately targeted people who had not even done a first degree, but they just proved they could improve things at work. And we wanted to give an avenue for those people. And rapid mass engagement, the mass bit, the rapid is the pace, but the mass is every single employee. And every single time we've done that, we've kind of battered down the doors of restrictive assumptions about who can do what job, that people need a degree in order to do this or that job. Yeah, there's nothing, I'm not against degrees. I mean, I work at a number of universities, but it's not the only thing to consider when you're looking at, when you're looking at who your leaders come from. Their fundamental traits and values are incredibly important as well. And with people who are not necessarily academically qualified, but with great traits, I mean, that's what you want. For example, in the nursing profession, the way I always say about the academic approach to jobs like nursing or policing or whatever, is if you were in a hospital and your loved one was suffering, would you like the nurse to have a degree but lacking compassion and empathy? Or would
Yeah.
you like him or her not to have a degree, but we have passion and empathy, flowing through their veins? And then they can learn the job, but the empathy and the compassion is crucial.
Yeah, it's true. It's so much, it's that human factor, isn't it? And I know,
Yes.
Frank, within the book, you've got, you open up with that rapid mass engagement, results and differentiation. Do you mind explaining that piece to listeners, mate, and what that's all about?
Yeah. All I did there, Brad, was just simply kind of demonstrate that this stuff works.
Mm.
And rather than go into the detail of that, because it's just a whole lot of case studies saying, this is the results, but there are some remarkable transformations in terms of percentage increases in, reductions in quality, reductions in absenteeism. I mean, there was lots and lots of indicators that something was. Now, again, there's a correlation rather than causation there, because there's a lot of things have to go on that contribute to that. So I don't want to claim that this is the only lever. That, for example, the senior leadership team has to be courageous. It has to be humble. It has to be prepared, for example, to stand up like Richard Davis did in Coca-Cola and apologize to his own workforce.
Yeah.
For what we had discovered in the workshops, and that degree of authenticity, etc., massively improves the chances of success in any of these. I mean, the best, probably to save readers or listeners time, probably the best story in the book that sums it up is when the Coca-Cola learning and development chief was walking around one of the plants. And she said to Steve Thorpe, who was the plant manager, but also had a record for turning around plants in Coca-Cola, she saw my stuff all over the wall, and the cathedral model of leadership, the engagement stuff, and all that. And she said to Steve, why are you using Frank Devine stuff when we have all this corporate stuff from Coca-Cola? And he just replied and said, because it works. Mm-hmm. And he went on to say, if you can design leadership development material that works as well as this, I'll happily adopt it. But in the meantime, I want my factory to do really well. So I'm using Frank's. And funny enough, there's a famous story in the Vietnam War about that when the Americans landed with their expensive, rifles, but the humidity and the close range fighting that went on in the jungles of Vietnam, they adapted and started using the Viet Cong's AK-47. And a senior guy was visiting them and said, why are you using the AK-47 when you have such a much better military rifle, the M60, I think it was? And the officer said, sir, because it works.
Yeah.
It fires. In the humidity, it's very simple. It doesn't, if you've got someone running at you from 5 yards, when you press the trigger, you want a bullet to come out the end of your weapon, Yeah. And so there's a whole theme around how I tested things in practice. So essentially, the scientific method: you have a hypothesis, and you predict what you think will happen if you do X. You try and neutralize all the other factors around it, and then you see what happens. And the advantage over pure academic work is that I can sustain the experiment for 20, 30 years. Yeah. The pure academics can never get the funding for that, nor can they get the intense exposure to the workforce. Could you imagine if someone turned up at a factory and said, I'd like to borrow your workforce for 3 years?
Yeah.
So I once alienated a university by accident when I was trying to explain the social anthropology aspect to this, that the way you understand what's actually going on in an organization is you have to be like David Attenborough with the gorillas. You have to be in there, letting them scratch you and scratching them back and observing, deep immersion in the actual reality. So we'd say in Lean, go to the Gemba, but in my case, stay in the Gemba for a long time as well. So you can see what happens over time. But the students were interested in this approach to research, and the head of the business school, who happened to be also the head of psychology, was observing the workshop, the class, and one of them said, "So you're saying social anthropology is kind of more effective sometimes than psychology?" I said, "No." I said they both got their place, but if a psychology researcher was doing the gorillas in the jungle, she would have sent them surveys to fill in.
Yeah.
So and everyone laughed, but I lost the business afterwards. So you've got to be a bit careful when you use humor.
Yeah.
I needed to get the students back on track, because that's not what I was supposed to be talking about. I wasn't talking about research methodology.
Yeah.
But they were just intrigued, and my general style is to go with people's interests. So if they ask me questions about research methodology, I won't say to them, "Can't answer that. It's not on the." I will actually try and deal with it, and then find a way of getting back on track afterwards, which is a good experience for the participants, but in that particular case was not very good commercially.
Yeah. Well, I love the work you've done and what you've written about on it, Frank, when it comes to rapid mass engagement and that whole culture piece. Do you mind explaining for the listeners, mate, the engaging employees around purposeful work piece, and the part that the cathedral higher purpose model of leadership plays with that?
Yeah, well, essentially, if you think about how we traditionally have tried to engage our workforces behind any type of initiative, but including culture change ones, essentially what happens is corporates spend a lot of time developing corporate values, and then we try and sell them to a workforce throughout the globe with different cultures, different backgrounds, different languages. And I spent time doing that in corporate life. It was banging my head against a brick wall on that, which was the motivation to start thinking of a different way of doing this. So I came to the conclusion that there was a kind of cultural bias in that anyway. That wherever the headquarters would have certain biases. And what we wanted to be was sensitive to local issues, local culture, local experience of what it's like to work around here. And that's why I created behavioral standards rather than values, which are bottom up, local. There's some science behind it, but essentially it's the way people want to be treated at work, given their experience, their culture, and their values, rather than we're telling you what the values are and you've just got to and adapt, if you like. And the other thing, for a large part of the world, Asia, Africa, Southern Europe to a degree, power distance is higher than in the what you might call the Anglo-American West, which would include Australia, by the way. So in those countries, Northwest Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, you've got low power distance. So in other words, hierarchy is not valued incredibly highly. We like the underdog. The Swedish king goes and buys his groceries in the supermarket, so things like that. Whereas for the rest of the world, accepting that the bosses are the bosses is quite strong culturally. So when we approach large parts of the world with lean and with non-hierarchical approaches to people, there is an element of culture there that we need to address and understand. So part of it was, we need this to be culturally sensitive. We need this to listen to the experience and the what matters in the local community. So the higher purpose comes in when we're trying to say, why are we doing this? So in approaching the workforce, give you an example. We mentioned Boston Scientific. Boston Scientific, the site is in the west of Ireland, which was the part of Ireland most heavily depopulated after the famine.
Yeah.
So the historical legacy of whole villages being depopulated, the population of Ireland went from 9 million to about 6 million and continued to decline after that. So it's a massive depopulation. The historical remnants of that is kind of in the culture. So one of the things we came up with as part of the higher purpose in Galway, and the workforce itself, it was the management group came up with this rather than the employees, because 3,200 would have been impractical. But we have the workforce in smaller companies has come up with it itself. But a key one was a future for our family and friends in the West. So that was saying that our kids may choose to emigrate. They might want to go to Australia. It's a lovely country, but we don't want them forced to leave Ireland. And that kind of thing applies in deindustrialized parts of the Rust Belt in the United States. That applies in depopulated parts of the UK, like Liverpool and the Northeast, or ex-steel communities where you've had early industrialization and then decline.
Yeah.
So heavily industrialized areas where you tend to have factories.
Yeah.
And then the issue with China, if you like, and if for an Australian audience, if that is the case here, the issue of China as a threat to Australia, it's not just a security threat; it's also a intellectual property threat. If you can keep jobs in Australia rather than having them undermined by property theft and stuff like that, and taken away to China, then you open up opportunities for people from less privileged areas to get into a good organization where they can develop and have a whole career rather than a series of isolated jobs. And that vision of giving back to the community by creating jobs. I mean, the Dupuy plant in Ringaskiddy going into the 2008-2011 recession had 650 employees, and it was lowly ranked within the hierarchy of plants. By the end of the recession, it added 700 onto 650, and other plants were closed in if you like, less expensive labor markets all over the world in order to bring products in. So when you can, if you like, keep products, keep manufacturing in areas where it had previously been priced out by working on service, by working not by driving down wages, but by just working on the delivery of the location, then you're doing something that people can buy into. Yeah, as long as they believe you're genuine and sincere about that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you read the last 3 pages of the book, but there's a lovely piece there about an employee using a letter I had in about the death of my mother.
Yeah.
To show my commitment to what that was all about.
Yeah.
So what I say to senior guys is, we mustn't have managerial language. We've got to talk in the way people talk down the pub, or in their own houses. So we've got to use the normal language that people use when they're talking to each other, not managerial language or corporate speak or consultant stuff, which is why there's some quite interesting stuff in some of the sets of behavioral standards.
Yeah.
People coming up, that doesn't look very corporate, and the employee said that's because it isn't.
Yeah. Hey Frank, I really love this approach where you're looking at purpose and you're looking at culture based on that local
Yes.
tribe, in a way, that local community. Yes. of that business. Frank, one question I've got, I've known a number of companies, BHP's one of them at the moment, and then you've got
mining companies.
Mining is, and then you've got US Synthetic or Champion X, and a few companies where they might have a company level purpose and vision and company values, but what they're doing is they're deploying purpose, where they're allowing anyone in their team to look at who they serve, their people, the community, who they serve,
yes.
look at the company purpose, but then create their own version of that and do the
That's
same
excellent.
for culture,
Yeah,
where
that's excellent.
they'll look
Yeah,
at values and principles, and then they'll define behaviors that are relevant to their area.
yeah.
Is that
That's
what
very
yeah,
well.
they
It's a
call
bit. It's a bit more radical than that, because what I do is, that's the same spirit though, but the corporate values are not a given, right? Now, corporate people get nervous with this.
Yeah.
Because they say to me, well, if they're not a given, they might come up with stuff that's contrary to our values. So what I guarantee is, if they ever do, I'll run naked through whatever the local, because values level is so broad and generic. When you get down to the specific behaviors locally, they're not going to conflict with each other. And
No.
sometimes they generate reform within corporate.
Yeah.
So in one client, the problem was reporting upwards more favorably than the reality. So being afraid to report the reality up to corporate. Well, all that meant was corporate had poor data to make decisions and everything else. They couldn't rely on it. So they created a standard called, this is about green and red indicators. When you're on track, you're green. When you're off track, you're red. We won't do the wrong thing to appear green. So employees were enabled to say, no, I'm not reporting that way, because that's not accurate.
Yeah.
Now, that meant the senior team had to go to corporate and say, we've actually been misreporting. We've discovered we've been misreporting, and now we're going to report honestly. So our numbers are going to go backwards.
Yeah.
But what you can guarantee with our numbers are they're accurate.
Yeah.
So they had to take the risk of their indicators going backwards, but their indicators were authentic.
Yeah. And
that's
a question
powerful.
that's massive. And I'm really keen to ask a question around, the whole leadership part on this, because we've got that concept. You've got that chapter, which is leadership that moves the dial. Now you've got this position where you have frontline employees where they're really looking at purpose and like, what are we about? And like you gave that example in Ireland, it could be about, well, our history and our culture has just been so tough. We just want to serve the community and have jobs here for the future. Like, that just motivates us. And then they might be looking at behaviors that are important to them and that they want to live by. And then you've got leadership where, what's the real adaptation? Do you mind going into that leadership that moves the dial and what that is?
Yeah, just on that particular point you've mentioned, there's a thing called the happiness myth, or I call it the happiness myth.
I saw that.
Yeah. The example of the Liverpool dock workers, when they, in the plant, and they told me they were proud of being the highest paid dockers in the world. And I asked them, how many ships are docking at Liverpool? And then they got the point that you can price yourself out of a global market very easily.
Yeah.
And the kind of 3-second reflection is, let's drive wages up. Well, what you do is you drive the productivity up in the plant, you drive the results up, you drive everything else, and then you share that with the workforce afterwards. But you have to earn the right in a global competitive market. You have to beat your competition. So there's a real commercial educational process going on here about how jobs are actually secured and how jobs are created. And that's one of the kind of unseen effects of the rapid mass engagement approach. The employees come out with an understanding of how to attract investment into their plant or their location. They understand how tough the competition actually is. It's not like a monopoly or some of the public sector stuff where you can, if you like, get away with stuff because you depend on subsidy or some sort of political decision that keeps you going. In the competitive global sectors, the only way you preserve jobs is by being really successful. So that hard-edged side of it is important. So that, for example, I mentioned the science behind this. In the science behind the behavioral standards, I use lots and lots of data about what sets of competencies correlate with high performance in organizations. So when we're looking at the employee data and the employees doing this themselves, I train them how to do it. We have to have a balance between what, if you like, motivates and what produces success. Now, ideally, you want the sweet spot between the both, but you can't just seek happiness. I mean, there's an example in the book where we had achieved the highest performance for. Don't mention the company because of what happened, but we had the highest performing plant in the world. Very, very high levels of engagement, but also customer service quality. We through just in time stuff and other lean initiatives, we'd reduced the warehouse stock, got rid of warehouses, were able to supply at the beat the customers wanted and all that, which was unusual in that sector. But a new boss came along, and her idea was to maintain the position in the various employee engagement indices, which was very, very high. Her idea was to just pay over inflation pay rises year on year. And I was only a consultant, so I wasn't an employee, but I said to her, look, you don't buy this stuff, you have to earn it. And if you just drive up wages and forget about how we got here in the first place, then the performance of the plant's going to go back, and it's going to become uncompetitive. Anyway, a few years later, corporate shut the whole plant. So there's that balance. So in terms of the actual leadership approach, that's the engagement side of it. But on the leadership approach, the cathedral model came from what kind of leadership can partly create, but mostly sustain this kind of high performance, continuous improving, globally competitive culture. And again, that was the test. And what I did was I tested, because I started in Shell and then went to Unilever. So these are big investors in leadership development. We had the very best. We had Harvard, we had everything. But the variation coming out of those programs was dramatic. Some tremendous leaders, but some awful narcissists who, I would never want to meet again in my life.
Yeah.
And if you've got that much variation in the output of the system, there's something wrong with the system. We have to be able. The vision for the cathedral model is that no employee ever should hesitate to apply for a job because of the boss of that department or team. That they know that, yeah, they've got a great boss at the moment. They don't want to leave their boss. That's a nice feeling, but we can guarantee that the boss in the other job is going to be an excellent boss as well. Won't be the same, because there's human differentiation, there's character, there's style, there's culture, but we'll be working within parameters of excellence. And anybody who's outside those parameters won't stay as a leader. And you saw some examples in the book of leaders being, not surviving the culture because they didn't have the same commitment to that culture.
Yeah.
Essentially, the cathedral model is a massive Pareto. It's looking at what moves the dial, what doesn't. It takes a Pareto break at a certain point where everything below that is not making enough contribution to focus on it. And it says, let's focus on the stuff that works, which is why there's nothing on reward in there. There's nothing on appraisal in there. And there's things in there that are not normally in leadership development, like managing overcommitment and how to sustain the whole thing. I have I call it accountability coaching, but that particular concept's not well known because I invented it and no one else knows about it. So, But essentially, it sits in the cathedral model horizontally rather than vertically, because it sustains all of this stuff above it. And by the way, it also sustains your financial standards, your quality standards, your lean standards. Everywhere where you have a standard, it sustains the standard.
Yeah. Do you mind delving into that a bit, where we talk about sustainable change and actually keeping it going? Do you mind exploring that for us more deeply with rapid mass engagement?
Yeah, because there's a chapter called Rapid but Sustainable ?
Yeah.
So the worry was we could march them all up to the top of the hill. Everything's brilliant, and then, like any system, it will start to flatline and go backwards. So how do you prevent that? So what kind of continuous improvement loops do you need to build in when you're talking about, in this case, leadership skills? So there's multiple in the system. But just to give you an example, I'm probably giving away a secret here. So if anyone comes on a workshop, I will have ruined it for them. But the way I do the leadership program, you're tested on what you've done on the first phase before you get into the second phase, but you don't know you're about to be tested. So it's a bit of a shock. So I walk into the room and say, "Oh, guys, I'm sorry, I'm old." And I'm still playing football, by the way, but I pretend I know I'm old and I slipped in the hotel this morning and banged my head and I can't remember anything about what we did last time.
Yeah.
So then I break them into proper groups, not random groups. So there's competition going on. So if it was in Australia, we might have competition between Aussie rules fans, rugby league fans, cricket fans. It could be geographical. It could be where their ethnic background. It doesn't matter. It would be a real team. And they have to compete to regurgitate and remember what we did the last time. So that's the first sustaining mechanism. As soon as people learn, they have to go out within 6 weeks. This is the leadership. And the senior leadership are tested by how much of the dial they've moved in the 6 weeks after they were trained, because I then have the middle and junior leaders in the room with me, the frontline supervisors, and I actually ask them, have you noticed a difference? And if they haven't noticed a difference, I go back to the senior guys who come in the next day and give them pretty strong feedback. Come on, guys, you need to up your game. Now, that's very different from the leadership approach of turning up, delivering a workshop, and walking away. It's about sustaining this over time. And then that's reinforced by training internal facilitators. So I train them in my approach, small sections first, so they get practice, maybe 18 months of doing small sections. Then the best of those graduate to doing whole days. So they might do the coaching day, they might do the recognition day, they might do the constructive feedback. So you have these people in the workforce who are subject matter experts in this whole approach. Meanwhile, from the general workforce, I've trained facilitators in the new culture. So we've taken what's produced by the workforce, turned it into a set of behavioral standards, and then we put training together to train employees how to keep this alive. So when, for example, directors arrive, they're trained on the culture by a shop floor worker, or two of them in a pair, not by HR. And could imagine the message that sends to senior people when a guy off the shop floor and someone from the warehouse or the office turns up and says, "Right, guys, we're training you now in the culture of this plant."
Yeah.
That could be 4 levels of hierarchy below, but it sends a message, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That we're all equal as human beings. We just do different jobs.
Yeah.
And that explains the pay difference.
Oh, it's true bottom up. It truly creates that bottom up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And
it sends a message to the cynics who say this will never happen, it's too good to be true. But to be fair, in life in general, things that sound too good to be true are usually too good to be true. So I have a lot of sympathy with skepticism. Cynicism is a bit more difficult psychologically, but I get around that through stories. I tell people the idea is to equip the employees with the kind of stories and arguments that they can use in the canteen when the discussion's on. It's a bit like if you have resistance going on, maybe in Ukraine at the moment, in Russian-controlled areas, then you got to supply them with the right equipment. You got to give them the connection to the internet. You got to give them the weapons. You got to give them the training. So this is the same. I actually train them in how to use stories and humor and anecdotes as a way of overcoming skepticism and even cynicism. I've even developed stories to deal with cynicism, which is much harder to crack than skepticism.
Yeah.
Skepticism is a sign of intelligence. Cynicism is a self-fulfilling prophecy problem that you need to break. So it's harder.
Comes from that narcissistic position, doesn't it? That often that cynicism. Yes,
sometimes it comes from simply having bad experiences in the past. So what I try and do is not judge people when they're being cynical. I I try and understand where it's coming from. So if you've been a highly energized employee trying to get things done, and management's never listened to your ideas for years, then you can understand people becoming cynical. You can only try so often, and I think that authenticity and approach to the workforce gains respect.
It's neat. It's truly you're flipping the whole traditional cultural approach on its head, because it's truly becoming bottom up with the way that it's run.
It needs top down as well. It needs the right leadership, hence the cathedral model of leadership. You can't rely on the way we train leaders conventionally. It's just not strong enough. We don't train leaders as a system of leadership. We train them generally with isolated interventions on particular specialism. So it's a very academic approach. Whereas the cathedral model is actually a system. And we know from Lean that when you implement a system, you're going to get far better results than random isolated interventions.
Yeah. Well, it covers it, doesn't it? Because I guess without the right leadership behaviors and the right leadership approach, the bottom up is not going to survive. It's not going to thrive. But
I get clients say to me, "We'll just use our corporate leadership." And I said, "Well, you can, but I can predict you won't get the same results." And what I usually have to do is negotiate some sort of a mutual recognition of standards approach. So there's no harm doing the corporate stuff, but you need to do this stuff as well. And maybe you get a buy on recognition, coaching, constructive feedback because you've done it in a different way, perhaps. That kind of approach.
Well, I think, Ray, I know I'm involved a fair bit in the world of Agile too, which Agile's truly in the great companies really worked so hard about that bottom up, the frontline autonomy, frontline empowerment. And, it's taken a completely different leadership approach to achieve it. It's got and I think the cathedral model that you've written about and what you've written about could really provide some insights over that Agile world too, because traditionally in Agile, they purely focus on the system of Scrum and the system of connected Scrum. There's leadership principles and leadership, values, but it's not been done as deeply, I don't believe anyway, looking into the cultural side as what we've done on the Lean side. That's gone so deep into culture, whereas Agile's it's got the culture bit and it's achieved insane things, but it's been quite systems based.
It's interesting. I'm doing a joint event in the UK in December with Kevin Dugan of Dugan Associates in America. And what I like about, because I say in the book that you need to have a good lean partner, and what I particularly like about Dugan's approach is the way they effectively take management out of the equation. And allow the employees to be autonomous once you've got the system in place. It kind of self-sustaining, almost like biology in that sense. We get a cut, things run to it and fix it. I know we might put a plaster on it, but essentially the body will mostly heal it. And that's why I'm doing I've never done a joint event before with a lean consultancy, but I'm doing one in the UK in December with Kevin Dugan, precisely to show the synergies there. It's the first time ever, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
It'd be great to see you combine, Frank, with someone from that Agile world, that IT technology world too, which is branching out now too. That would be a really interesting presentation, talking.
Well, if ever you want to bring me on with someone who can have a debate discussion, just do so. I'd be delighted. I love the debate. I mean, when I was at Cardiff, the students said, "Will you debate with X? Will you debate with Y?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'll debate. Debate is the most powerful way of learning you can think of." Unfortunately, some people don't want to debate, but there you go. I'm always up for a debate.
I might be able to line that up, Frank. I might line that up because I think it'd be a great conversation from the position of, and I just got to think whether to get a company on who's really nailed it with Agile, or get one of the global experts like Jeff Sutherland or Avi Shear, one of the guys. So I'll have a bit of a chat and that would bring that for the future. No, Frank, excellent. on that topic, if you had a frontline group of employees and you had 2 minutes to just give them like an elevator, hey, this is where to start. What would you say to that frontline group of employees?
If we're just talking to employees at the start of a
And then
process.
I'll ask you about the leadership in the next question.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
let's go on employees first, because I'm normally
Yeah.
ask about the leaders, Frank. I normally to guests say about the leaders, but with
course,
us
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about rapid mass engagement, this bottom up, I thought let's start with the employees. What would you say to
What
them?
we would have done before that is inside the room there would have been a history tree of where the organization was, what it had done, because you don't want to be seen to be critical of previous attempts to improve. You want to acknowledge and respect the good work of other people. So what I would normally do is say, guys, let's just walk around the room and have a look at your history here on this site. And the final ones there would explain the process, the actual process. So it's the UR workshop. It will be actually number 2 because the senior leadership would be number 1 to create all this. So your workshop number 2, this is where you fit. What you're going to do today is 3 things. One, you're going to prioritize what the biggest single obstacles to achieving the higher purpose, which we will have explained previously. Second, you're going to create the behavioral data on which you yourselves as employees working with senior management will create your own culture in your own words. And thirdly, you're going to elect someone to go to this event at the end where all the prioritized events are decided by consensus, no matter how long it takes. And in that event, management won't be allowed to adjourn, to talk. They can't. Everything's out in the open. There's no sub meetings, and this is step 1 to doing that. By the end of this, you will have your own culture that you will have created, determining how you're treated at work. That will be articulated. It'll be shared with you, but it'll be your own, based on your own data and created by your own people that you've elected. And we'll also have a plan to address the issues that you've prioritized today and all your colleagues later, and how to address them. And that will become the actual policy of this company on this site, to what to deal with, what to prioritize, and how to deal with it. Now, at that point, they think I'm mad, right? So they think I'm absolutely crazy. So usually spend the next hour and a half batting back lots of skepticism, cynicism, but that's all right. That's very, very healthy for the reasons we've said before. And part of that process is I'm equipping the workforce to be able to understand how this works, so that when they leave the workshop, other people coming to speak to them, they have an idea. So as the workshops roll on, you get less and less skepticism, less and less cynicism, because people, I call it the bow wave effect.
Yeah.
The culture's already started to change before we're actually formally changing the culture.
Yeah.
By the experience the employees have in the room with me, means they go out and talk about that. So that kind of, it's like a viral effect through the workforce. Now, sometimes we get attempts to sabotage it because certain trade union is more ideological rather than traditional trade unionists. So there's sometimes a political attempt to sabotage it. That makes it difficult. But the authenticity of the process itself wins in the end. And by the way, that trade union or a group of trade union guys trying to sabotage it is very rare. Normally, the trade union guys see the potential of it very quickly and give it total support. But sometimes there's a political if you essentially want the revolution and you don't want capitalism to succeed, then me coming along is bad news, So you can understand that.
Yeah, if you want the true purpose of what a union's about, you're like all for it. But if it's more that political agenda and you're doing it to create you want the angst and anger to keep driving yourself forward. Yeah, you do get those
now,
two.
Luckily, that latter group's a minority. In one particular site, the actual union committee split on this issue, and unions don't usually split. Unity is one of the key values. So that shows you how strongly the majority group supported what we were trying to do.
It's great.
They were prepared to split their own committee in order to support it.
Well, you're ultimately looking to pay ultimate respect to the frontline employees who create the value and engage them and give them autonomy and lead them forward to a better career and a better outcome. You know, like it's everything that the union wants ultimately, at least if you look at the paperwork. So it's brilliant.
Exactly. And by the way, the frontline leaders, because the frontline leaders have often been bypassed, neglected, blamed. You know, the corporate communications people say, well, they didn't communicate the message very well. And I used to say, well, maybe the message wasn't that great. Let's not blame each other. Let's have a look at what's
we're not talking their language, like you said earlier.
Yes, exactly. So that's why in corporate life, I used to try and get the communications to report into me.
Yeah.
So we could manage it at both ends of the spectrum.
Oh, it's neat. So Frank, with your journey, mate, and all the learning you've had and this focus on, you know, working with frontline employees to really understand, create their purpose, their behaviors, create that language and that culture that is really creating bottom up, but then having the cathedral approach to leadership. So you've got the right leadership approach and culture to lead it forward. And, you know, you've been able to experiment with so many organizations and look at how do we make this succeed? How do we make it stick? And ultimately we're creating respect for people. But what's been a recent insight for you, Frank, amongst this whole journey? What's been a recent learning for you where you've been like, wow, okay, that's different?
Yeah, I was talking to some of the people from some of the organizations in writing the book. And a number of people said to me, Frank, have you ever thought about why other sites don't, within the same organization, tend not to try to replicate? And I said, no, I've never understood that. And we talked about it theoretically. Part of it is not invented here. Part of it is ego. So learning the stuff in the sites where it's successful, taking it somewhere else, but not wanting to attribute it to where it came from, if you like. I mean, I've had intellectual property problems with people presenting my stuff without acknowledging where it's come from, things like that. So that is an interesting one. You would expect people to look at what's happened and say, why can't we do something similar on our location? Now, it does happen sometimes, like there's been numerous Rolls-Royce locations and Coca-Cola locations. It does happen sometimes, but it doesn't happen as often as you might think.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Like that. But I love the model that you're talking about, that it is a model that you could roll site by site by site by site and create the same system, area by area.
Not the same.
No.
So you can't just take it and roll it out. So, I mean, there's a story in the book where there's three senior guys standing at a flip chart with the behavioral not a flip chart, a poster. So, are we going to take these behavioral standards back to our organization and roll them out? And the employee doing said, look, if you think you can roll these out, you don't understand how they were created.
Yeah, we're not talking rapid mass engagement here. We're talking going back to traditional. Yeah.
Yeah, and the behavioral standards for their sites, each of the individual sites, are going to be different depending on the history, the culture, and the individuals on the site. So you can't roll it out.
No, you can, but I'm guessing you can roll out the program, but you can go site by site doing the whole rapid mass engagement of the system, and you're going to end up with each. Yeah.
It's interesting though. When I have something called a diagnostic and decision-making event, and what I say to people is, rapid mass engagement may not be for you. So what we have to do is we have to look at what level of engagement you've got, what level of enablement you've got, what level of leadership you've got, and what level of lean capability you've got, either through an external partnership or through your own resources. And then we look at what you're trying to achieve. And so that creates a gap analysis. And examining that gap analysis sometimes leads to a result that says rapid mass engagement's not what you need to do, but you need to do something else. And so it's not always appropriate in all circumstances. To give you an example, if the senior leadership is going to change within the next 2 years, don't start rapid mass engagement. but do something else. If all the locations are up for review and a factory is going to be closed, then don't start a rapid mass engagement during that process. There's one exception to that, where we kept a factory open by doing the rapid mass engagement. But that was a kind of emergency situation where it was a strike, and corporate were going to close the factory because of the strike. And we used the rapid mass engagement to overcome the strike and all the issues, and therefore the factory wasn't shut. But generally, there's times when you shouldn't. And I'll be frank and honest with people. I mean, one leader has said to him, "Your senior team's not strong enough to do this." Having spent a whole day with him in a room. And it was lovely because he could have been offended, which some people are, and gone away and said, "Oh, I'll get somebody else. I'll work with someone else." But he didn't. About 3 years later, he rang me up and said, "Frank, I've got the senior team that's capable of doing this. Can we start it now?"
Yeah.
So, which was that's exactly the response you want. I work in professional football or soccer. I don't know what it's called in Australia. Is it called football or soccer in Australia? Soccer, yeah. I work for Ireland. I assess players for Ireland. And sometimes you give feedback and you get the kind of attitude from the player or the coach or the agent or whatever it is, that he's either good enough or he isn't. Well, I don't believe that. Feedback will enable you to be better, So listen to the feedback and work on the feedback. So there you go.
Yeah, it's that constant learning.
You did ask me what would I say to leaders? I'd say to leaders kind of what we've just said, that it's not a guarantee that rapid mass engagement is right for you. What we'll do is we'll look at where you are with data. We look at where you want to be. I'll test where you want to be as well as an intelligent outsider, just to test, how realistic where they want to be is compared to where they are. And then we'll do a gap analysis against certain things. And on the basis of that diagnosis, which is what the coaching approach in the cathedral model is, a double diamond. So we do the diagnosis first before you do the problem solving. On the basis of that diagnosis, you'll agree what's the best approach. And the approach might be, and you don't want to do rapid mass engagement. Or indeed, you might not even want to work with me. Yeah. There's no guarantee. I may have challenged you so much you don't like me by the end of the day. So let's take nothing for granted, but let's do the analysis and see where it gets us.
Yeah, it's great. Well, Frank,
it's a one day workshop kind of thing.
Yeah, it sounds like it's great how you've got the journey where you start from that analysis and then really build from there with the right organizations to work with. Well, Frank, I really appreciate your knowledge, mate, and everything you have done and you continue to do, and creating such an amazing book. Mate, how can people reach out to you?
Thank you for reading it.
Oh, yeah, appreciate it, mate. And mate,
you must read the last 3 pages.
Yeah, it's brilliant, mate.
How can people reach me? Well, my website is acceleratedimprovement.co.uk. In the book, I'm asking people to interact with me on the ideas, so we can learn and take it into different places and things like that. My email is acceleratedimp, which is that's the longest email you can have, and accelerated improvement's longer.
Yeah.
So the way people remember it is a little Irishman running around, accelerated imp.
Yeah.
And I'm showing my age now at AOL.com. I never got around to changing my email address. Yeah. So, I can give you my phone number as well. I don't mind getting calls and texts. It's 0044 780 137 4606.
Nice, Frank. Well, Frank, really appreciate your time and knowledge, mate. Thanks heaps for helping us create a better future.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Brad. Good luck for podcast. Sound marvelous. Great contribution. So well done for doing that, and hope to get back for one of these debates at some point.
We will line up a debate, mate. I will find the right person from the agile world, and I might find someone from that more traditional lean world too. So we might get both. We'll find that. That'll be great. Well, thanks,
and we
Frank.
might be able to talk about sport then, because obviously we can't at the moment because of what's going on in Australia.
No, let's leave that. It'll be better in the future. Thanks, Frank. Catch you later, mate.
Bound to be. See you then.
Cheers, mate.
Bye now.
Bye. What a great episode. Remember, you can go to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast website to resources to get hold of the 3 articles Frank's kindly given us to get hold of, and also, of course, his book that you can get through any bookstore or website like Amazon. There were 2 key takeaways for me from this episode. Firstly, bottom-up, localized behaviors. What a powerful concept, especially when you consider that around the world with global corporations, localized in a country, there are different cultural traits. Even within regions of a country, there are different regional cultural traits. Of course, these are going to blend into the workplace. The power of going bottom-up, localized behaviors and also culture is amazing because it builds into that region and really allows that ownership and that empowerment of the employees. The second key takeaway for me was bottom-up, localized purpose for the same reason. That as you talk the dynamic nature and the differences around a country or a world, and you can bring that purpose in from that local region and get it going bottom up, it's such a powerful concept that's going to engage everyone and create that rapid energy and cultural shift that Frank talks about. And of course, Frank's been through this for many years of experimentation with many of our top organizations globally to figure out this approach. And I really thank you, Frank, for the knowledge you've shared, for the book you've written, and everything you will do going forward, mate. Thanks for helping us create a better future. Bye for now.